Hello there and welcome to Mind Drift, your quiet passage through the mysteries of the human mind. Tonight we are going to explore the landscape of memory itself, the delicate architecture inside your skull that holds every moment you have ever cherished, and the quiet, often invisible processes that sometimes cause that architecture to fade. We will move slowly through the terrain of dementia and Alzheimer's disease, through the small vessels and the flickering chemistry that sustains thought, and through the question that so many of us carry in the backs of our minds as we watch loved ones age or as we ourselves notice a name slipping away in conversation. What is happening inside the brain when memory begins to dissolve? And what, if anything, can we do to protect this most precious and fragile part of ourselves? Let us begin with a distinction that confuses nearly everyone, a pair of words often used interchangeably but which point to different things. Dementia and Alzheimer's disease. Dementia is the larger category, the umbrella term. It comes from a root that means loss, a departing, a removal of the mental faculties. Dementia describes what happens when cognition begins to slip away, when the abilities we once took for granted, memory, language, reasoning, recognition, start to crumble. But dementia itself is not a single disease. It is a syndrome, a collection of symptoms that can arise from many different causes. Alzheimer's disease is one of those causes. In fact, it is the most common cause of dementia, especially as we age. If you were to gather 100 people who have developed dementia in their later years, the majority of them would be living with Alzheimer's. But there are other roads that lead to the same destination. Parkinson's disease can bring dementia in its later stages. There is something called Lewy body disease, named after the tiny clumps of protein that accumulate in the brain. There is frontotemporal lobe degeneration, which tends to strike earlier in life and affects personality and language before it touches memory. And then there are rarer conditions, names that sound almost like incantations: progressive supranuclear palsy, corticobasal degeneration, each a different pattern of loss, a different topography of decline. And somewhere in that list, perhaps lower down, less common but increasingly recognized, is chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE. This is the condition that has emerged into public awareness over the past couple of decades, the disease associated with repeated blows to the head, with contact sports, with boxing and football and hockey. CTE is also a cause of dementia. It is another pathway by which the brain can lose itself. Imagine for a moment the brain as a city, vast and intricate, with billions of inhabitants communicating constantly across networks of unimaginable complexity. Dementia is what we call it when parts of that city begin to go dark, when the streets empty, when the communication lines fail. Alzheimer's is one kind of catastrophe that can befall that city, a slow accumulation of debris in certain neighborhoods, a clogging of the streets, a loss of power to entire districts. But there are other catastrophes too, other patterns of damage, and they each have their own name. Now the question that follows naturally, the one that rises in almost everyone who learns about Alzheimer's disease, is this: how do I avoid it? How do I keep my own city of thought intact as the years go by? The statistics are sobering. If you were to examine the brains of people who have lived to the age of 85, more than half of them would show the hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease, the plaques and tangles, the protein deposits that are the signature of the condition. But here is something curious and hopeful. Not everyone who has those changes in their brain experiences the symptoms of Alzheimer's. Not everyone with the pathology has the disease in the way we usually think of disease, as something that disrupts life, that steals function. This tells us something important. It tells us that the brain has resilience, that it can adapt, that it can find ways to work around damage. And that resilience, that capacity to continue functioning even when parts of the system are compromised, is something that can be strengthened. One of the most powerful tools we have is something called cognitive reserve. Think of it as a kind of savings account for the brain, a reserve of mental strength built up over a lifetime. People who have challenged their brains throughout their lives, who have learned new skills, who have stayed curious, who have read and conversed and puzzled over problems, seem to develop a thicker cushion against decline. Even if the plaques and tangles are accumulating, even if the pathology is there, the brain can often root around the damage, find alternate pathways, keep the lights on in enough districts to maintain function. So staying mentally active is one answer to the question of how to protect yourself. Using your brain, challenging it, not letting it idle. Learning a new language late in life, picking up a musical instrument, engaging deeply with ideas and with other people. All of this builds cognitive reserve, strengthens the networks, gives the brain more options when some routes become impassable. But the brain does not exist in isolation. It is profoundly connected to the body, and the health of the body shapes the health of the mind in ways we are only beginning to fully understand. Physical fitness matters. Cardiovascular health matters. The same things that protect your heart also protect your brain. High blood pressure, over years and decades, damages the delicate vessels that feed the brain. High cholesterol can lead to blockages, to reduced flow, to areas of the brain slowly starving for oxygen. And high blood sugar, the hallmark of diabetes, is particularly dangerous. Diabetes does not just affect how your body processes energy, it also accelerates the processes that lead to Alzheimer's disease. The mechanisms are complex, involving inflammation and vascular damage and the way insulin works in the brain, but the upshot is clear. Keeping your blood sugar stable, avoiding diabetes if you can, managing it carefully if you cannot, is one of the most important things you can do to protect your memory as you age. And then there is alcohol. Alcohol is a complicated substance when it comes to the brain. It damages the brain in its own distinct ways, not through the same mechanisms as Alzheimer's or CTE, but through direct toxicity, through effects on brain structure, particularly in areas involved in memory and coordination. If you already have some vulnerability, some early pathology building in your brain, alcohol can make the symptoms worse. It can lower the threshold at which damage becomes noticeable. There is no direct evidence that alcohol causes Alzheimer's disease, but there is plenty of evidence that it is not good for brain health, and that in the context of other risks, it can tip the balance toward decline. You might wonder, as you lie here in the quiet dark, whether these diseases are becoming more common, whether something in our modern world is making our brains more fragile. The answer, as far as we can tell, is no. What has changed is not the prevalence of the disease, but our awareness of it. 40 years ago, when someone grew old and their memory began to fail, it was often dismissed as senile dementia, as just what happens when you get old. There was a shrug built into that phrase, an assumption that this was natural, inevitable, not worth investigating. But we know now that this is not inevitable. Some people live to very old ages with their minds intact, sharp and clear, and fully themselves until the very end. Dementia is not normal aging. It is pathological aging, a deviation from the path, something going wrong. And because we understand that now, because we have named it and studied it, it seems more common. But it has likely always been there, haunting the edges of old age, simply unrecognized, unnamed, folded into the background noise of getting old. There are researchers who spend their lives looking at brains, holding them in their hands, slicing them into thin sections, peering at them under microscopes, searching for the patterns that distinguish one kind of dementia from another. And in that work, certain ideas begin to emerge, theories about what might be driving these diseases at the deepest level. One of those ideas centers on inflammation. Inflammation is the body's response to injury or infection, a mobilization of the immune system to repair damage and fight off invaders. But inflammation, when it becomes chronic, when it does not resolve, can itself become a problem. In the brain, inflammation is increasingly recognized as a key driver of neurodegeneration. In Alzheimer's disease, there is tremendous inflammation. In CTE, the same. The brain's immune cells, the microglia, become activated and stay activated, releasing chemicals that are meant to be helpful in the short term, but which, over months and years, damage the very neurons they are supposed to protect. If we could understand this process better, if we could find ways to calm the inflammation without suppressing the immune system's ability to do its necessary work, we might be able to slow or even prevent these diseases. It is a delicate balance because some inflammation is necessary. The brain needs its immune system, but too much, for too long, is poison. Another piece of the puzzle involves the smallest blood vessels in the brain, the capillaries and arterioles that form a dense network throughout every cubic millimeter of tissue. These vessels are responsible for delivering oxygen and nutrients to neurons and for carrying away waste. They are also part of something called the blood-brain barrier, a tightly regulated border that keeps toxins and pathogens in the bloodstream from entering the brain. When these small vessels are healthy, the barrier holds. The brain remains a protected space. But when the vessels are damaged, whether by high blood pressure, by diabetes, by trauma, by inflammation, the barrier can become leaky. Substances that should stay in the blood begin to seep into the brain tissue, irritating it, triggering more inflammation, setting off a cascade of damage. This vascular component, this health of the tiny vessels, is thought to be one of the earliest changes in many neurodegenerative diseases. Before the plaques and tangles become widespread, before the symptoms appear, the blood vessels may already be struggling. And if that is true, then protecting vascular health becomes not just a matter of preventing strokes or heart attacks, but a matter of preventing dementia. So the same advice appears again. Control your blood pressure, keep your cholesterol in check, manage your blood sugar. These are not separate concerns. They are all part of the same story, the story of keeping the brain nourished and protected, of maintaining the infrastructure that allows thought to happen. Trauma also damages these vessels. A blow to the head, the kind that causes the brain to move suddenly inside the skull, can shear the small vessels, can cause them to leak. Even if the injury does not cause a concussion, even if there are no immediate symptoms, the damage is there. And if it happens repeatedly, over years, the cumulative effect can be devastating. Stress, too, plays a role. Chronic stress keeps cortisol levels elevated, and cortisol, over time, damages the hippocampus, a region of the brain essential for forming new memories. Stress constricts blood vessels, raises blood pressure, promotes inflammation. It is another thread in the web of factors that can either protect or erode the brain. And sleep. Sleep is perhaps one of the most underappreciated tools we have for maintaining brain health. During sleep, the brain is not resting in the sense of being idle. It is extraordinarily active, but in a different mode. There is a system, sometimes called the glymphatic system, that becomes most active during sleep. It is a kind of waste clearance system, a network that flushes out the metabolic byproducts that accumulate during the day, including some of the proteins that, if left to build up, form the plaques associated with Alzheimer's disease. When you sleep deeply, this system works efficiently, draining away the debris, keeping the brain clean. When you do not sleep enough, when sleep is fragmented or shallow, the system does not work as well. The waste accumulates. Over years, this may contribute to the buildup of pathology, so sleep is not a luxury. It is a biological necessity, as important for your brain as food or water. Now, imagine you are a parent. Your child comes to you excited, eager to play a sport. Football, rugby, hockey, something that involves speed and contact and the possibility of collisions. What do you say? This is not an easy question. Every child is different. Every family is different. The risk is real, but so is the joy of play, the lessons learned through sport, the camaraderie, the physical confidence. There is no single right answer, but there are things you can do to reduce the risk. First, consider whether the contact is necessary. There are many sports that offer all the benefits of athletics without the repeated blows to the head. Swimming, tennis, track, basketball, soccer played with attention to heading the ball less frequently or not at all at young ages. If the child is just as happy in one of those sports, the choice becomes easier. If the child is set on a contact sport, if it feels essential to them, then the next step is to make sure the environment is as safe as possible. The coach matters enormously. A coach who understands the risks, who teaches proper technique, who does not glorify playing through injury, who recognizes the signs of a concussion and takes them seriously, can make a huge difference. Education matters. Not just for the coach, but for the players, for the parents, for everyone involved. Understanding what a concussion is, knowing that you do not have to lose consciousness to have one, recognizing that even hits that do not cause concussions can still cause damage over time. All of this awareness can change behavior. And delay full contact as long as possible. A young child's brain is still developing, still vulnerable. Their neck muscles are not strong enough to stabilize the head during a collision. The younger the child, the greater the risk. Waiting until the body is more robust, until the musculature has developed, until the person is physically mature enough to absorb and resist impacts, reduces the cumulative exposure during the most vulnerable years. Even then, even with all precautions, the risk does not disappear. A blindsided hit, one that the player does not see coming, is far more dangerous than a hit they are braced for. When you see a collision coming, you tense your neck, you set your body, you prepare. The forces are distributed differently. But a hit from an unexpected angle, when the head is free to snap suddenly in one direction, that is when the brain moves most violently inside the skull, when the shearing forces are greatest, when the damage is most likely. Think of the brain not as a solid mass, but as a delicate structure, softer than you might imagine, floating in fluid inside the hard case of the skull. When the skull stops suddenly, the brain keeps moving, at least for a fraction of a second. It sloshes, it twists, it presses against the interior of the skull. The long nerve fibers, the axons that connect one part of the brain to another, are stretched and sheared. The small blood vessels are torn. The chemistry inside neurons is disrupted. Most of the time, the brain recovers. The inflammation resolves, the chemistry rebalances, the person feels normal again within days or weeks. But sometimes, especially if there are repeated injuries, the damage does not fully heal. The inflammation becomes chronic. The tau protein, which normally helps maintain the structure inside neurons, begins to misfold and clump together. These clumps spread slowly from one cell to another, and over years or decades, they accumulate into the tangles that define CTE. CTE looks different under the microscope than Alzheimer's disease, even though both involve tau tangles. The pattern is different, the distribution is different. In CTE, the tangles tend to cluster around small blood vessels and in the depths of the folds of the brain. In Alzheimer's, they spread more diffusely, starting in the memory centers and radiating outward. These are different diseases, different stories, though they share some common themes. The symptoms of CTE can be devastating. Memory loss, yes, but also changes in mood, in personality. Depression, anxiety, impulsivity, aggression. Some people with CTE become unrecognizable to those who love them. And the tragedy is that the disease often does not become apparent until years after the person has stopped playing the sport, stopped experiencing the trauma. The damage was done long ago, quietly, and only now, in middle age or later, does it declare itself. We cannot diagnose CTE in a living person, not yet. The technology does not exist to see the tangles clearly enough in a living brain. The diagnosis can only be confirmed after death, by examining the brain tissue directly. This makes it hard to study, hard to track, hard to know how common it really is. But the brains of athletes who died young, who took their own lives, or who deteriorated rapidly, have been examined, and many of them show the unmistakable signs. This has changed the conversation around contact sports. It has led to rule changes, to better helmets, to protocols for managing concussions. But helmets, no matter how advanced, cannot fully protect against the forces involved. The skull may be cushioned, but the brain still moves inside it. The only way to eliminate the risk is to eliminate the collisions. And yet, people still play. Children still want to play. Because the experience of sport is powerful, because it teaches things that are hard to learn elsewhere, because it is part of the culture, part of identity. This is the tension, risk and reward, danger and joy. If you were to ask what the brain needs to stay healthy across a lifetime, the answer would be a kind of harmony, mental stimulation and social connection, physical activity and good nutrition, stable blood sugar and blood pressure, adequate sleep and managed stress. Protection from toxins, including alcohol, and protection from trauma. None of these things alone is a guarantee, but together they create an environment in which the brain is most likely to thrive, most able to resist the insults and injuries that accumulate over the years. Cognitive reserve, that idea we touched on earlier, is built through a lifetime of engagement. It is built by reading, by learning, by having conversations that challenge your assumptions, by solving problems, by creating things. It is built by staying curious. The brain is remarkably plastic, capable of forming new connections even late in life, but it needs to be asked to do so. A brain that is coasting, that is doing the same things day after day without novelty or challenge, does not build reserve. It may even lose it. Social connection is part of this too. Isolation is a risk factor for dementia. People who are lonely, who lack meaningful relationships, decline faster. This may be because conversation itself is cognitively demanding. You have to listen, interpret, remember, respond, all in real time. You have to model the other person's mind, anticipate what they might say, adjust your own words accordingly. This is a workout for the brain, and people who do it regularly, who have rich social lives, seem to benefit. Physical activity works through multiple pathways. It improves cardiovascular health, which we have already discussed. But it also promotes the release of growth factors in the brain, chemicals that support the survival and growth of neurons. It reduces inflammation. It improves mood, which in turn can improve sleep and reduce stress. Exercise is one of the few interventions that has been shown, again and again, to have broad benefits for brain health. Diet matters too, though the details are still being worked out. Diets that are good for the heart, like the Mediterranean diet, seem to be good for the brain. Lots of vegetables, fruits, whole grains, healthy fats from fish and nuts and olive oil. Less red meat, less processed food, less sugar. These patterns of eating reduce inflammation, support vascular health, provide the nutrients the brain needs to repair itself. And then there is the question of what to avoid. We have mentioned alcohol. We have mentioned head trauma, but there are other toxins as well, environmental exposures that can damage the brain over time. Heavy metals, certain pesticides, air pollution. These are harder to control individually, but awareness of them, minimizing exposure where possible, is part of the picture. It can feel overwhelming, the list of things to do and not do, the constant vigilance required. But perhaps it is helpful to think of it not as a set of rules, but as a way of living, a gentle orientation toward health. Not perfection, but attention. Not anxiety, but care. The brain is resilient, but it is not invincible. It can recover from many insults, but not infinitely. There is a cumulative aspect to damage, a threshold beyond which recovery becomes harder and eventually impossible. The goal is to stay below that threshold for as long as possible, to give the brain the resources it needs to repair itself, to build the reserve that allows it to keep functioning even when some damage is present. Because some damage is probably inevitable. We all accumulate some wear and tear over a lifetime. The question is whether that wear and tear remains below the level that causes symptoms, or whether it crosses into the territory of disease. Inflammation, as we have discussed, is central to this process. But what exactly triggers inflammation in the brain? The answers are many. Infection can do it. The brain is usually well protected from pathogens, but when an infection does take hold, the immune response can be fierce. Chronic infections elsewhere in the body, even something as seemingly minor as gum disease, can contribute to systemic inflammation that affects the brain. Injury triggers inflammation. This is the immediate response to trauma, the rush of immune cells to the site of damage. Normally, this inflammation resolves once the injury heals, but if the injuries are repeated, If they happen before the previous inflammation has fully cleared, the system can get stuck in a state of chronic activation. Metabolic dysfunction also promotes inflammation. High blood sugar, high insulin levels, obesity, all of these create a pro-inflammatory environment throughout the body, and the brain is not spared. And then there are the protein aggregates themselves, the plaques and tangles. Once they begin to form, they can trigger inflammation. The immune cells in the brain recognize these clumps as foreign, as something that should not be there, and they try to clear them. But often they cannot. The proteins are too sticky, too resistant. And so the immune cells stay activated, releasing inflammatory chemicals continuously, and this inflammation damages nearby neurons, which may cause them to release more misfolded protein, which triggers more inflammation, a vicious cycle. Breaking that cycle is one of the great challenges in treating neurodegenerative disease. How do you calm the inflammation without allowing the protein aggregates to accumulate unchecked? How do you support the immune system in clearing debris without allowing it to destroy healthy tissue in the process? There are no good answers yet. Many drugs have been tried, and most have failed. The brain is a difficult target. It is protected by the blood-brain barrier, which keeps out most molecules, including most drugs. And it is incredibly complex, with so many interacting systems that intervening in one often has unintended consequences in another. But research continues. There are trials underway testing antibodies that bind to amyloid or tau, trying to help the body clear them. There are trials testing anti-inflammatory drugs, trying to quiet the overactive immune response. There are trials testing drugs that protect the blood vessels, that improve metabolism, that enhance the brain's own repair mechanisms. And there is growing interest in prevention, in identifying people at risk before symptoms appear, and intervening early when the damage is still minimal, when there is still time to change the trajectory. This is where biomarkers come in. A biomarker is a measurable indicator of disease, something you can detect in blood or spinal fluid or on a brain scan. For Alzheimer's disease, there are now biomarkers that can detect the presence of amyloid plaques or tau tangles years before memory problems begin. This opens up the possibility of early intervention, of treating people before they have dementia, in the hope of preventing it from ever developing. But it also raises difficult questions. If you could know right now whether you have the early signs of Alzheimer's, would you want to know? If there were no treatment available, no way to change the outcome, would knowing help or harm? These are deeply personal questions. Some people want to know everything, want to plan, want to make decisions while they still can. Others would rather not know, would rather live without that shadow hanging over them. As treatments improve, as we develop interventions that actually work, the calculus may change. Knowing becomes more valuable if you can do something about it. But for now, we are in a strange in-between place, where we can sometimes see the disease coming but cannot always stop it. For CTE, the situation is even more uncertain. We have no biomarkers yet that can reliably detect it in living people. We cannot predict who will develop it or how severe it will be. We only know that the risk increases with the number and severity of head impacts, and that some people seem more vulnerable than others, perhaps because of genetics, perhaps because of other factors we do not yet understand. This uncertainty makes it hard to give clear advice. How many hits are too many? How hard is too hard? We do not know. We know that professional football players and boxers have high rates of CTE, but we do not know the risk for someone who played in high school and college and then stopped. We do not know the risk for someone who played soccer and headed the ball thousands of times. We are still learning. What we can say is that every hit matters, that the damage is cumulative, and that the brain has limits. Respecting those limits, erring on the side of caution, seems wise. The blood-brain barrier, that protective border we have mentioned several times, deserves a closer look. It is one of the most important and least appreciated features of brain biology. The cells that line the blood vessels in the brain are packed tightly together, with special junctions that seal the gaps. Unlike blood vessels elsewhere in the body, which are relatively leaky, allowing substances to pass freely between blood and tissue. The vessels in the brain are selective, allowing only certain molecules through. Oxygen and glucose pass easily. They are small and essential, but larger molecules, proteins, immune cells, most of these are kept out. This protects the brain from toxins and pathogens that might be circulating in the blood. It keeps the environment around neurons stable, predictable, free from the fluctuations that happen in the rest of the body. But this barrier is not invincible. It can be damaged. High blood pressure over time weakens it. Inflammation weakens it. Diabetes weakens it. Trauma weakens it. When the barrier becomes leaky, the consequences can be profound. Proteins from the blood, things like fibrinogen and albumin, leak into the brain tissue. These proteins do not belong there. They activate the microglia, the brain's immune cells, setting off inflammation. They disrupt the function of neurons. They can interfere with the formation of new memories. And once the barrier is leaky, it can become a vicious cycle. The inflammation caused by the leaked proteins damages the blood vessels further, making them even more leaky. The brain tries to repair the damage, but if the insults keep coming, the repair mechanisms are overwhelmed. Protecting the blood-brain barrier is one of the most important things you can do for long-term brain health. And the way you do that is by protecting the blood vessels themselves. Blood pressure control, blood sugar control, avoiding trauma, reducing inflammation, it all comes back to the same themes. Sleep, that nightly descent into unconsciousness, is far stranger and more vital than most of us realize as we drift off each evening. For most of human history, sleep was a mystery, a little death that we survived each night, emerging in the morning more or less restored, but with no real understanding of what had happened in the hours between. We now know that sleep is not a single state, but a complex cycling through different stages, each with its own purpose, its own signature pattern of brain activity. There is light sleep, that transitional zone where you can still be easily awakened, where sounds and sensations sometimes filter through. There is deep sleep, where the brain produces slow rolling waves of electrical activity, where the body is profoundly still, where growth hormone is released and tissues are repaired. And there is REM sleep, named for the rapid eye movements that occur during it, where most vivid dreaming happens, where memories are consolidated and integrated. The glymphatic system, that waste clearance network, is most active during the deep stages of sleep. The space between brain cells actually expands slightly during deep sleep, allowing cerebrospinal fluid to flow more freely through the tissue, carrying away the metabolic waste products that have accumulated during waking hours. Among those waste products is beta amyloid, the protein that forms the plaques in Alzheimer's disease. When you sleep well, night after night, this system keeps the amyloid levels low. But when sleep is chronically disrupted, when you do not get enough deep sleep, the amyloid begins to accumulate, and amyloid itself can disrupt sleep, creating another vicious cycle. The plaques interfere with the brain circuits that regulate sleep, making it harder to achieve deep sleep, which means less clearance of amyloid, which means more plaques, which means worse sleep. This may be one reason why sleep problems often appear early in Alzheimer's disease, sometimes years before memory problems become obvious. The disease is disrupting sleep, and the disrupted sleep is accelerating the disease. It is worth thinking about what happens during a typical day in the life of a neuron. These cells are extraordinarily active. They are constantly firing, sending electrical signals down their long axons, releasing neurotransmitters at their synapses, receiving signals from thousands of other neurons, integrating all that information, deciding whether to fire again. This activity requires enormous amounts of energy. The brain, despite being only about 2% of your body weight, consumes roughly 20% of your energy. All that activity produces waste. Damaged proteins, oxidized molecules, bits of cellular debris. Normally, cells have mechanisms to clean up this waste, to recycle components, to maintain order. But neurons are particularly vulnerable because they do not divide. They do not renew themselves the way cells in your skin or your gut do. A neuron that is born during your development in the womb is the same neuron you will have for your entire life if it survives. It has to last. So the maintenance systems in neurons are critical. One of those systems involves structures called lysosomes, little sacs filled with enzymes that break down waste. Another involves the proteasome, a molecular machine that chops up damaged proteins. And then there is autophagy, a process where parts of the cell are engulfed and digested, a kind of controlled self-cannibalism that clears out damaged organelles and protein clumps. When these systems work well, the neuron stays clean, functional, healthy. But when they are overwhelmed, when the waste is being produced faster than it can be cleared, things start to go wrong. Proteins misfold and clump together. Mitochondria, the energy-producing structures in the cell, become damaged and less efficient. The cell struggles, and here is where sleep comes in again. During sleep, the activity level of neurons drops. They are not firing as frantically. The metabolic rate decreases. This gives the cleanup systems a chance to catch up, to clear the backlog of waste. Sleep is a kind of nightly maintenance window, a time when the brain can attend to housekeeping without the constant demands of waking consciousness. People who work night shifts, who have chronically disrupted sleep schedules, seem to have higher rates of cognitive decline later in life. The reasons are likely multiple, but the lack of consistent, high-quality sleep is probably a major factor. The brain simply does not get the downtime it needs to clean itself. You might imagine the brain during sleep as a city in the quiet hours before dawn, when the streets are empty and the cleaning crews come through, washing away the grime of the previous day, repairing potholes, clearing drains. If those crews never get a chance to work, if the city is always crowded and busy, the infrastructure slowly deteriorates. There is something both humbling and awe-inspiring in the realization that our consciousness, our sense of self, our memories and thoughts and feelings all depend on such fragile biological machinery. A few proteins folding the wrong way, a few blood vessels becoming leaky, a chronic lack of sleep, and the whole edifice can begin to crumble. The history of our understanding of dementia is relatively recent. For centuries, cognitive decline in old age was simply accepted as inevitable, as the natural end of the arc of life. There were no specialized fields of neurology or psychiatry. There was no distinction between different types of dementia. Old people became forgetful, confused, sometimes agitated, and that was that. The disease that we now call Alzheimer's was first described in detail in the early 1900s by a German physician named Alois Alzheimer. He had a patient, a woman in her 50s, who developed severe memory problems, paranoia, confusion. When she died, Alzheimer examined her brain and found it shrunken, atrophied, and under the microscope, he saw the plaques and tangles that are now recognized as the hallmarks of the disease. He presented his findings, and for a while the disease was named after him, but it was considered rare, a form of presenile dementia, something that struck people in middle age. It was not until much later, in the second half of the 20th century, that researchers realized the same pathology was present in the brains of many elderly people who died with dementia. What Alzheimer had described was not a rare early-onset condition, but the most common form of age-related cognitive decline. The name stuck, and Alzheimer's disease became the term for this widespread condition. The plaques that Alzheimer saw are made of beta amyloid, a fragment of a larger protein that is normally present in the brain. For reasons we still do not fully understand, this fragment sometimes begins to clump together, forming sticky aggregates that accumulate in the spaces between neurons. The tangles are made of tau, a protein that normally helps stabilize the internal skeleton of neurons. In Alzheimer's disease, tau becomes chemically modified, hyperphosphorylated, and it detaches from the skeleton and begins to form twisted fibers inside the cell. For decades, the dominant theory was that the plaques were the primary cause of the disease. Clear the plaques, the thinking went, and you could stop or reverse Alzheimer's. Enormous effort and billions of dollars were poured into developing drugs that would reduce amyloid levels. But trial after trial failed. Drugs that successfully cleared amyloid from the brain did not improve symptoms, did not slow decline. This has led to a major rethinking. Perhaps the plaques are not the cause but a symptom or a response to some deeper problem. Perhaps the tangles are more important, or perhaps the real driver is something else entirely, something upstream of both plaques and tangles. Inflammation, vascular damage, metabolic dysfunction. The field is still sorting this out, still searching for the true root of the disease. CTE, by contrast, has a clear cause: repeated head trauma. But the mechanism by which trauma leads to tau tangles is not fully understood. The initial injury involves mechanical forces, the stretching and tearing of axons, the damage to blood vessels. This triggers inflammation, and somehow, in the aftermath, tau begins to misfold. The misfolded tau spreads, possibly through direct transfer from one neuron to another, possibly through the release of tau into the extracellular space where it can be taken up by neighboring cells. Once the process starts, it may be self-perpetuating. Even after the trauma stops, after the person retires from the sport, the tau pathology can continue to spread, slowly, over decades. This is why symptoms often do not appear until years after the last concussion. The brain has a limited repertoire of responses to injury. Whether the injury comes from trauma, from toxins, from lack of oxygen, from infection, the brain responds with inflammation, with the activation of microglia and astrocytes, the support cells that normally nourish and protect neurons. In the short term, this response is helpful. The microglia clear debris, the astrocytes form scars to wall off damaged areas. But if the response becomes chronic, if it does not shut off, these same cells can become destructive, releasing chemicals that kill neurons, perpetuating the damage. Understanding how to modulate this response, how to promote the helpful aspects of inflammation while preventing the harmful aspects, is one of the major challenges in neuroscience. It is not as simple as just suppressing inflammation entirely, because you need some level of immune activity to clear debris and fight infections. The goal is balance, precision, knowing when to turn the response on and when to turn it off. There are some people whose brains seem remarkably resistant to damage. Autopsies sometimes reveal brains with extensive plaques and tangles, the kind of pathology that would normally be associated with severe dementia, and yet the person was cognitively normal until they died. These are the people with high cognitive reserve, the ones who built up enough redundancy, enough alternate pathways, that even significant damage did not prevent them from functioning. What distinguishes these people? Often it is education, complex careers, lifelong learning, rich social networks, physical activity. But there is probably also a genetic component. Some people simply have more resilient neurons, more efficient repair systems, better clearance of waste. We do not yet know how to identify these people in advance, or how to give the rest of us the same advantages, but the existence of such people proves that resilience is possible. It suggests that the relationship between pathology and symptoms is not linear, that you can have disease without dementia, at least for a while. The brain has thresholds, tipping points. Below a certain level of damage, compensation is possible. Above that level, the system fails. This is why early intervention might be so important. If you can keep someone below the tipping point, if you can slow the accumulation of pathology just enough that they stay in the zone where compensation is possible, you might effectively prevent dementia even if you have not cured the underlying disease. Think of it like a dam holding back a reservoir. Small cracks in the dam can be tolerated as long as they do not grow too large. The dam can still hold. But if the cracks spread, if they reach a critical size, the whole structure fails catastrophically. Interventions that slow the growth of the cracks, that reinforce the structure, might keep the dam intact indefinitely, even if they do not eliminate the cracks entirely. Physical exercise, as we have touched on, is one of the most robust interventions we have. Study after study has shown that people who are physically active have lower rates of dementia. The benefits seem to come from multiple mechanisms. Exercise improves blood flow to the brain, delivering more oxygen and nutrients. It stimulates the production of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, a protein that supports the growth and survival of neurons and the formation of new synapses. It reduces inflammation throughout the body and the brain. It improves insulin sensitivity, helping to keep blood sugar stable. It promotes the growth of new blood vessels in the brain, increasing the density of the vascular network. And exercise does not have to be extreme. You do not need to run marathons or lift massive weights. Moderate activity, walking briskly for 30 minutes most days of the week, is enough to confer significant benefits. The key is consistency, making it a regular part of life rather than something you do occasionally when motivation strikes. There is also evidence that the type of exercise matters. Aerobic exercise, the kind that gets your heart rate up and keeps it there, seems particularly beneficial for the brain. But resistance training, lifting weights, or doing bodyweight exercises also has value, especially for maintaining muscle mass and metabolic health as you age. And then there is the emerging understanding that exercise may also help clear waste from the brain, working in concert with sleep. Physical activity increases the pulsation of arteries, and these pulsations help drive the flow of cerebrospinal fluid through the brain tissue, enhancing the glymphatic clearance we discussed earlier. So exercise and sleep work together, each amplifying the benefits of the other. People who exercise tend to sleep better, and people who sleep well tend to have more energy for exercise. It is one of those virtuous cycles, the opposite of the vicious cycles that drive disease. Diet is more complicated, in part because it is harder to study. People eat hundreds of different foods in countless combinations, and their dietary patterns are intertwined with many other aspects of their lives, their culture, their income, their education. Teasing out the specific effects of individual nutrients or foods is challenging, but some patterns have emerged. Diets rich in omega-3 fatty acids, found in fatty fish like salmon and mackerel, seem to be protective. These fats are incorporated into the membranes of neurons, keeping them flexible and functional. They also have anti-inflammatory properties. Diets rich in antioxidants, compounds found in colorful fruits and vegetables, may help protect against oxidative stress, the damage caused by reactive oxygen molecules that are a byproduct of normal metabolism. The brain is particularly vulnerable to oxidative stress because it uses so much energy and because neurons are not easily replaced. Diets that keep blood sugar stable, that avoid spikes and crashes, seem to be protective. This means favoring whole grains over refined carbohydrates, eating protein and healthy fats along with carbohydrates to slow the absorption of sugar, avoiding sugary drinks and snacks. And then there is the question of caloric restriction. Some studies in animals have shown that eating less, reducing caloric intake by 20 or 30% without malnutrition, can extend lifespan and reduce the incidence of age-related diseases, including neurodegeneration. The mechanisms are thought to involve metabolic shifts that promote cellular repair and stress resistance. Whether this translates to humans is still uncertain, and deliberate caloric restriction is difficult to sustain. But the idea that eating less, or at least not overeating, might be beneficial for brain health is plausible. Intermittent fasting, where you restrict eating to a certain window of time each day, has also attracted interest. It may trigger some of the same metabolic pathways as caloric restriction, promoting autophagy and other cleanup processes. But again, the evidence in humans is still limited, and these approaches are not suitable for everyone. What seems clear is that the modern Western diet, high in processed foods, sugar, and unhealthy fats, is not doing our brains any favors. It promotes obesity, diabetes, inflammation, all of which are risk factors for dementia. Shifting toward a more traditional dietary pattern Something like the Mediterranean diet or similar whole food-based diets from other cultures is almost certainly beneficial. Social connection, as we mentioned, is another protective factor. Loneliness and social isolation are associated with faster cognitive decline and higher rates of dementia. The reasons are likely multifaceted. Social interaction is cognitively demanding in ways we often do not appreciate. Maintaining relationships requires memory, empathy, communication skills, the ability to navigate complex social dynamics. All of this keeps the brain active. But there are also emotional and psychological dimensions. Loneliness is stressful. It raises cortisol levels, disrupts sleep, promotes depression. All of these can harm the brain. Conversely, meaningful relationships provide emotional support, a sense of purpose, reasons to stay engaged with the world. In some cultures, elders are deeply integrated into family and community life. They are respected, consulted, given roles and responsibilities. In other cultures, older people are often isolated, living alone, disconnected from the rhythms of daily life. The rates of dementia may differ in part because of these social structures. This is not something that can be easily changed at the individual level, but it highlights the importance of maintaining and nurturing relationships, of making the effort to stay connected even when it becomes harder, even when mobility or health issues make it more difficult to get out and see people. Phone calls, video chats, whatever works. The connection itself is what matters. Purpose, too, seems to matter. People who have a sense of purpose, who feel that their lives have meaning, who have goals and projects and things they care about, seem to be more resilient against cognitive decline. This might be because purpose motivates people to stay active, mentally and physically. It might be because it reduces stress and promotes well-being. Or it might be that the brain itself functions better when it is oriented towards something, when it has reasons to maintain itself. Retirement, for some people, is a time of liberation and exploration, a chance to pursue interests that were set aside during working years. For others, it is a time of loss, a loss of identity and structure and purpose. The difference in outcomes can be striking. People who retire into active, engaged lives tend to do well. People who retire into passivity and isolation often decline. This is not to say that everyone must work until they drop, but rather that finding ways to stay engaged, to contribute, to feel needed and valued, is important for long-term cognitive health. Volunteering, mentoring, creative pursuits, hobbies that involve learning and skill development, all of these can provide purpose and keep the brain active. There is a concept in gerontology called successful aging, the idea that aging does not have to be a process of inevitable decline, that with the right conditions and the right choices, people can remain healthy, active, and engaged well into old age. Cognitive health is a major component of successful aging. You can have a strong body, but if your mind is failing, the quality of life suffers immensely. The things that promote successful aging are not secrets, they are mostly common sense. Stay active, eat well, sleep enough, manage stress, stay connected to others, keep learning, protect yourself from injury, avoid toxins. These are simple in principle, but can be difficult in practice, especially in a world that often seems designed to make them hard. Modern life is full of cognitive and physical conveniences that reduce the need for effort. We drive instead of walk. We sit instead of stand. We consume passive entertainment instead of engaging in active creation. We eat foods that are engineered to be hyperpalatable, that override our natural satiety signals. We live in environments that are often socially fragmented, where neighbors do not know each other, where communities are dispersed. All of this makes it harder to do the things that protect the brain. It requires intentionality, conscious choices to go against the grain, to build in the activities and habits that promote health. But it is worth it. The brain is what allows you to experience the world, to connect with others, to remember your past and imagine your future. It is the seat of everything that makes you you. Protecting it, caring for it, is one of the most important things you can do. And even if you do everything right, there are no guarantees. Genetics play a role. Some people carry gene variants that increase their risk of Alzheimer's, most notably a variant of the APOE gene called APOE4. Having one copy of this variant increases risk. Having two copies increases it substantially. But even with two copies, it is not a certainty. It is a risk factor, not a destiny. There are other genetic factors, too, dozens of variants, that each contribute a small amount to overall risk. Collectively, genetics probably account for about half of the risk for Alzheimer's disease. The other half is environmental, lifestyle, all the factors we have been discussing. For CTE, genetics may also play a role, though the research is still in early stages. Some people seem to develop severe CTE after relatively few head impacts, while others with extensive exposure show only mild changes. This variability might be due to genetic differences in how the brain responds to injury, how efficiently it clears tau, how robust its repair mechanisms are. If we could identify the genetic factors that confer resilience, we might be able to develop therapies that mimic those protective effects. This is one of the goals of precision medicine, tailoring interventions to the individual based on their unique genetic and biological profile. But for now, we do not have those therapies. What we have are the lifestyle interventions, the things that work broadly, that benefit most people most of the time. And we have awareness. Understanding what is happening in the brain during neurodegeneration, understanding the risk factors and the protective factors, empowers people to make informed choices. It takes some of the fear out of the unknown and replaces it with agency. Fear of dementia is pervasive, especially among people who have watched a loved one decline. The prospect of losing yourself, of becoming a burden, of forgetting the people and experiences that define your life, is terrifying. But fear alone is not useful. It can lead to paralysis, to avoidance, to denial. What is more useful is understanding, preparation, and action. Understanding that while risk cannot be eliminated, it can be reduced. Preparation in the form of planning, having conversations with family about wishes and values, getting legal and financial affairs in order while you still can, and action in the form of the daily choices that protect brain health. There is also the question of how we, as a society, care for people with dementia. The medical system is often ill-equipped to handle the complexities of cognitive decline. Dementia is not like a broken bone that can be set, or an infection that can be cured with antibiotics. It is a progressive, incurable condition that requires ongoing support, often for many years. Caregivers, usually family members, bear an enormous burden. Caring for someone with dementia is physically, emotionally, and financially exhausting. The person you are caring for may not recognize you, may become agitated or aggressive, may require constant supervision. It is a kind of grief that unfolds slowly, watching someone fade away while their body remains. Better support for caregivers is desperately needed. Respite care, financial assistance, training in how to manage difficult behaviors, emotional support. These things can make the difference between a caregiver who is able to continue and one who collapses under the strain. And there is the need for better long-term care options. Nursing homes and memory care facilities vary widely in quality. The best ones provide person-centered care, treating residents with dignity, creating environments that are safe but also engaging and pleasant. The worst ones are warehouses where people are left to languish. We can and should do better. There is also a cultural dimension to how we think about aging and cognitive decline. In cultures that revere elders, that see wisdom and experience as valuable, aging can be a time of respect and continued contribution. In cultures that value youth and productivity above all, older people, especially those with cognitive impairment, can be marginalized, rendered invisible. Shifting these cultural attitudes is a long and difficult process, but it matters. How we treat people with dementia reflects our values as a society, our understanding of what makes a life valuable, of who deserves care and respect. The tau protein that tangles in both Alzheimer's disease and CTE is, under normal circumstances, a humble and essential worker inside neurons. Its job is to stabilize microtubules, the long tubular structures that form a kind of railway system inside the cell. Along these tracks, cargo is transporting proteins and organelles and other cellular materials moving from the cell body out to the far reaches of the axon and back again. Without tau holding the tracks in place, the whole transport system would collapse. But tau is a shape-shifter. Its form depends on chemical modifications, small molecular tags that get added or removed. Phosphate groups in particular are attached to tau by enzymes called kinases and removed by other enzymes called phosphatases. When tau has the right number of phosphate groups in the right places, it does its job beautifully. But when the balance is disrupted, when too many phosphate groups accumulate, tau changes shape. It detaches from the microtubules and begins to drift free in the cell. Free-floating tau has a tendency to stick to other tau molecules, forming pairs, then small aggregates, then larger tangles. These tangles are toxic. They clog up the interior of the neuron, interfering with transport, with metabolism, with everything the cell needs to do to survive. Eventually, the neuron dies. What causes tau to become hyperphosphorylated in the first place? In Alzheimer's disease, the triggers are still being debated. Amyloid plaques might play a role, or metabolic stress, or inflammation. In CTE, the trigger seems to be mechanical injury, the physical forces of impact that damage the axon and disrupt the normal regulation of tau. Once the process starts, it can spread. Tau has a prion-like quality, meaning that misfolded tau can act as a template, causing normal tau molecules to misfold as well. And there is evidence that tau can be released from dying neurons and taken up by neighboring cells, carrying the pathology from one region of the brain to another. This spreading pattern is visible in the progression of both Alzheimer's and CTE. The diseases start in specific regions and then gradually expand. In Alzheimer's, the pathology typically begins in the entorhinal cortex, a region near the hippocampus involved in memory, and then spreads outward through connected areas. In CTE, it starts around blood vessels in the depths of the sulci, the folds of the brain, and then radiates from there. The pattern of spread follows the connectivity of the brain, moving along the pathways that neurons use to communicate. This supports the idea that tau is actually moving from cell to cell, traveling along the neural highways, infecting new territory. If this is true, then stopping the spread of tau might be a way to halt the disease. There are experimental therapies designed to do exactly this, antibodies that bind to tau and prevent it from being taken up by cells, or drugs that stabilize tau and prevent it from misfolding in the first place. Some of these are in clinical trials now. Whether they will work remains to be seen. The plaques in Alzheimer's disease, those clumps of beta amyloid that accumulate outside neurons, were long thought to be the primary villain in the story. But their role is now more ambiguous. Amyloid begins to accumulate years, sometimes decades, before symptoms appear. By the time someone is diagnosed with Alzheimer's, the amyloid burden in their brain may have been present for 20 or 30 years. This long asymptomatic period suggests that amyloid alone is not sufficient to cause dementia. Something else has to happen. Perhaps the amyloid sets the stage, creating an environment where tau can misfold more easily, where inflammation is more likely to become chronic. Or perhaps amyloid is a response to some other insult, an attempt by the brain to wall off or neutralize a threat that has gone awry. There is a hypothesis, still controversial, that amyloid might be part of the brain's immune response, that it has antimicrobial properties and accumulates in response to infections. This would explain why it appears so early and why clearing it has not been therapeutically successful. If amyloid is trying to do something useful, removing it might not help and could even make things worse. The brain, as we have seen, is not an isolated organ. It is part of the body, connected through the bloodstream, through the immune system, through metabolic pathways. What happens in the rest of the body affects the brain, and what happens in the brain affects the rest of the body. Diabetes, for instance, is a disease of blood sugar regulation, but its effects extend far beyond glucose metabolism. High blood sugar damages blood vessels everywhere, including in the brain. It promotes inflammation. It interferes with insulin signaling, and insulin is not just important for glucose uptake. In the brain, insulin plays a role in synaptic plasticity, in memory formation, in the clearance of amyloid. Some researchers have even called Alzheimer's disease type 3 diabetes, highlighting the metabolic dysfunction at the heart of the disease. Similarly, heart disease and brain disease are intimately linked. The same factors that contribute to heart attacks and strokes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, smoking, sedentary lifestyle, also contribute to dementia. What is good for the heart is good for the brain. The vessels that feed the heart and the vessels that feed the brain are part of the same system, subject to the same risks. There is a beautiful simplicity in this. You do not need one set of interventions to protect your heart and another to protect your brain. The same healthy lifestyle benefits both. Exercise, good nutrition, not smoking, managing stress, these things reduce your risk of heart disease and stroke and dementia all at once. And yet, despite this simplicity, despite the fact that the advice is widely known, many people do not follow it. The reasons are complex. Lack of time, lack of resources, lack of knowledge, lack of support. Food deserts where fresh produce is unavailable. Neighborhoods without safe places to walk or exercise. Jobs that are stressful and leave little time or energy for self-care. Social and economic structures that make the healthy choice the hard choice. This is where public health and policy come in. Individual choices matter, but they are made within a context, and that context can either support health or undermine it. Making the healthy choice the easy choice, the default choice, requires changes at a societal level. Better urban planning, more green spaces, safer streets, access to affordable healthy food, workplace policies that support work-life balance, healthcare systems that emphasize prevention as much as treatment. These are not quick fixes, and they require political will and resources, but they have the potential to shift the trajectory for entire populations. The word dementia, as we noted at the beginning, comes from roots meaning away from the mind, a departure from sanity or reason. But this etymology carries a stigma, an implication that people with dementia are no longer fully themselves, no longer fully human. This is a harmful misconception. A person with dementia is still a person. They still have feelings, preferences, a history, an identity. They may not remember recent events, they may struggle with language or with recognizing faces, but they are still present, still experiencing the world in their own way. Treating people with dementia with dignity and respect requires seeing past the symptoms, connecting with the person inside. It requires patience, creativity, a willingness to enter their reality rather than constantly trying to pull them back into ours. There are approaches to dementia care that emphasize this person-centered perspective. Validation therapy, for instance, encourages caregivers to validate the emotions and experiences of people with dementia, even if their perceptions of reality are distorted. If someone with dementia believes they need to go to work, even though they retired 20 years ago, arguing with them or correcting them often causes distress. Instead, acknowledging their feelings, asking them about their work, engaging with the memory can be calming and affirming. Music therapy is another powerful tool. Music seems to reach parts of the brain that remain intact even when much else has been lost. People with advanced dementia who can no longer speak may still sing along to songs from their youth. The melodies and rhythms unlock memories, emotions, a sense of connection. Reminiscence therapy uses photographs, objects, and stories from the person's past to stimulate memory and conversation. Even when recent memory is gone, long-term memories from childhood or young adulthood often remain vivid. Talking about these memories can bring joy and a sense of continuity. And then there is simply the power of presence, of touch, of a familiar voice. Holding someone's hand, speaking gently, spending time without demanding anything, These simple acts of human connection can provide comfort and reassurance even when words and memories have faded. The experience of dementia is different for each person. Some people become anxious or agitated. Others become withdrawn. Some experience hallucinations or delusions. Some retain their sense of humor and their ability to enjoy simple pleasures. The disease does not erase the person all at once. It is a gradual process, and at every stage, there is still someone there, still deserving of care and compassion. For families, watching this process unfold is heartbreaking. There is a particular kind of grief that comes from losing someone incrementally, from having them still physically present but mentally absent, from moments of recognition that flicker and then vanish. It is a grief that can last for years, complicated by the demands of caregiving, by guilt and frustration and exhaustion. Support groups for caregivers can be invaluable, providing a space to share experiences, to learn from others who are going through the same thing, to feel less alone. Knowing that what you are feeling is normal, that others have felt it too, can be deeply comforting. And there is the importance of self-care for caregivers. The instruction on airplanes to put on your own oxygen mask before helping others applies here. If you burn out, if your own health fails, you cannot care for anyone else. Taking breaks, asking for help, maintaining your own social connections and activities, these are not luxuries or indulgences. They are necessities. The question of when to seek outside help, when to consider a care facility, is one of the hardest decisions a family can face. There is often guilt associated with this choice, a feeling of failure or abandonment. But sometimes it is the right choice, the only sustainable choice. A good facility can provide round-the-clock care, social interaction, safety, and structure that may not be possible at home. And placing a loved one in a facility does not mean stopping being involved. Visits, phone calls, advocating for their needs, all of this remains important. Every family has to navigate these decisions based on their own circumstances, their own values, their own resources. There is no single right answer. CTE, unlike Alzheimer's, is entirely preventable. It requires exposure to head trauma, and if that exposure does not happen, the disease does not develop. This makes it both simpler and more tragic. Simpler because the cause is clear. More tragic because the exposure is often voluntary, the result of choices made to play a sport, to pursue a career, choices often made when young, without full awareness of the risks. The question of informed consent is central here. Can a child truly consent to taking on the risk of CTE when they decide to play football? They may love the game, may dream of playing professionally, but they likely do not understand the potential long-term consequences. And even if they are told, can a 10-year-old or a 15-year-old really grasp what it might mean to develop dementia in their 40s or 50s, to lose their memory, their impulse control, their sense of self? Parents are making these decisions on behalf of their children, and they are doing so with incomplete information. The science is still evolving. We know that risk increases with exposure, but we do not have precise numbers. We do not know how much is too much for any given individual. This uncertainty makes the decision even harder. If you could know with certainty that playing youth football would lead to CTE, the decision would be easy. Do not play, but if the risk is unknown, if it is a probabilistic thing, then families have to weigh the known benefits against the uncertain risks. The benefits are real. Sports teach teamwork, discipline, resilience, physical fitness. They provide community, identity, opportunities for scholarships and careers. For some kids, sports are a lifeline, a source of structure and purpose and positive adult role models. But contact sports, specifically, involve risks that non-contact sports do not. And the question is whether those specific sports are worth the specific risks, or whether the same benefits could be obtained in safer ways. There is a movement toward flag football as an alternative to tackle football for younger ages. The game is similar, the skills are similar, but without the collisions. Some argue that this is the future, that tackle football should be reserved for older players who are more physically developed and who can make more informed choices about risk. Others argue that this changes the fundamental nature of the sport, that the physicality is part of what makes football football. This is a cultural conversation as much as a medical one, a question of values and traditions and what we are willing to give up for safety. Hockey has undergone changes too, with rules against checking in youth leagues, with more attention to concussion protocols. Rugby, boxing, mixed martial arts, all of these are grappling with similar questions. And then there are sports where the risk is less obvious but still present. Soccer, where heading the ball can lead to cumulative subconcussive impacts. Cheerleading, where falls and collisions can cause head injuries. Even basketball, where elbows and falls are common. The conversation about head trauma in sports is expanding beyond the most obvious culprits, and this is probably a good thing. Awareness is the first step toward prevention, but awareness also brings anxiety. Youth sports participation has declined in some areas, and concern about head injuries is part of the reason. Parents are keeping their kids out of contact sports, sometimes out of sports altogether. This has its own costs, because physical activity is important and sports provide benefits beyond just fitness. The goal should not be to eliminate sports, but to make them safer. Better rules, better enforcement of rules, better equipment, better education, better medical support. And in cases where the risks truly cannot be mitigated, perhaps reconsidering whether the sport, at least in its current form, is worth continuing. The brain of a developing child is particularly vulnerable. The skull is thinner, the neck is weaker, the brain itself is still forming connections, still pruning away unused synapses, still myelinating axons to speed up communication. Disrupting these processes with repeated impacts may have consequences that do not become apparent until much later. Studies of young athletes have found changes in brain structure and function even in the absence of diagnosed concussions. White matter, the bundles of axons that connect different brain regions, shows signs of damage. These changes may be reversible if the exposure stops, but we do not know for sure. We do not have good long-term data on kids who played contact sports for a few years and then stopped. The precautionary principle would suggest erring on the side of caution, minimizing exposure during the most vulnerable years, waiting until the brain is more mature before introducing contact. There is also the issue of cultural pressure. In some communities, football or hockey is not just a sport, but a central part of identity. Boys, and increasingly girls, grow up expecting to play, and opting out can feel like a rejection of community, of tradition. Coaches and parents may pressure kids to play through injuries, to tough it out, to not be weak. Changing this culture requires changing attitudes at every level. Coaches need to prioritize safety over winning. Parents need to support their kids in making choices that protect their health. Communities need to broaden their definitions of success and value, to celebrate achievements in non-contact sports and in non-athletic pursuits as much as they celebrate achievements on the football field. This is not easy. Culture is deeply rooted, resistant to change, but it is possible. Other changes that once seemed impossible have happened. Attitudes toward smoking, toward seatbelts, toward drunk driving have shifted dramatically over the past few decades. What was once normalized is now seen as dangerous and irresponsible. The same shift can happen with attitudes toward head trauma in youth sports. Meanwhile, researchers continue to study the brains of deceased athletes, mapping the pathology, trying to understand the mechanisms, looking for biomarkers that could allow diagnosis in living people. There have been advances. PET scans that can detect tau tangles are now available, though they are expensive and not widely used. Blood tests that can detect tau fragments are in development. These tools may eventually make it possible to diagnose CTE in living people, to track its progression, to test whether interventions are working. But for now, the diagnosis remains post-mortem, and families are left with uncertainty. If someone is experiencing memory problems, mood changes, cognitive decline, and they have a history of head trauma, CTE is a possibility, but so is Alzheimer's or Lewy body disease or frontotemporal dementia. The symptoms overlap. The treatments, such as they are similar. but the knowledge of what exactly is happening in the brain, the ability to name it, can provide a kind of closure, a confirmation that the suspicions were correct. Brain donation has become an important part of this process. Athletes and their families are increasingly choosing to donate their brains for research after death, contributing to the growing body of knowledge about CTE. This is a generous and important act, one that may help future generations even as it provides answers for the present. The act of donating a brain is not without emotional weight. It requires planning, legal arrangements, coordination with research institutions. It means that after death, the brain will be removed, examined, preserved. For some families, this is comforting, a sense that something meaningful will come from their loss. For others, it is difficult, a final invasion, a disruption of the body. There is no right or wrong way to feel about it. What is clear is that the research depends on these donations. Each brain tells a story, adds data, helps to refine our understanding. Patterns emerge across dozens, then hundreds, then thousands of brains. Correlations between number of years played and severity of pathology, between specific positions and specific patterns of damage, between symptoms and underlying biology. This knowledge shapes recommendations, influences policy, informs the next generation of parents and athletes making decisions. And slowly, incrementally, the culture is changing. Concussions are taken more seriously now than they were 20 years ago. Players are more likely to be pulled from games, more likely to be evaluated, more likely to be held out until symptoms resolve. Rules have changed to reduce head-to-head contact. Penalties are stricter. The message is clearer. Protecting the brain matters, but there is still a long way to go. The macho culture of playing through pain, of proving toughness, is still powerful. And at the professional level, where millions of dollars are at stake, where careers are short and competition is fierce, the incentives to take risks remain strong. The relationship between inflammation and neurodegeneration is one of the most active areas of research, a puzzle that researchers return to again and again because it seems to sit at the crossroads of so many pathways. Inflammation is not a single thing, but a cascade of events involving dozens of different cell types and hundreds of signaling molecules. When you cut your finger, the redness and swelling that follow are inflammation, a mobilization of resources to clean the wound and begin repair. This is acute inflammation, and it is essential for healing. But the brain experiences a different kind of inflammation, one that can smolder for years without resolution. The microglia, those immune cells resident in the brain, are constantly surveying their territory, extending and retracting their delicate processes, sampling the environment, looking for signs of trouble. When they detect damage or debris or pathogens, they transform, becoming activated, changing shape, releasing cytokines and other signaling molecules to call for help and to begin the cleanup. In a healthy response, this activation is temporary. The microglia clear the problem and then return to their resting state. But in chronic neurodegeneration, they seem unable to return. They remain activated, sometimes for decades, and in this state, they release chemicals that are meant to kill pathogens but which also damage neurons. They release reactive oxygen species, toxic molecules that oxidize and destroy cellular components. They release enzymes that break down the extracellular matrix. They become, in essence, friendly fire, attacking the very tissue they are meant to protect. Why does this happen? Part of the answer may lie in the nature of the triggers. Misfolded proteins like amyloid and tau are difficult to clear. They resist degradation. The microglia try to engulf them, to break them down, but they cannot. And so the microglia stay activated, continuously trying and failing to solve the problem, and in the process, causing collateral damage. Another part of the answer may involve age. As we grow older, microglia seem to become more prone to this kind of chronic activation, less able to regulate their response. They develop what is sometimes called a senescent phenotype, where they are stuck in a dysfunctional state, neither fully active nor fully resting, producing inflammation without producing effective cleanup. And then there is the contribution of systemic inflammation, inflammation elsewhere in the body that signals to the brain. If you have chronic gum disease or arthritis or obesity, the inflammatory molecules circulating in your blood can cross into the brain, especially if the blood-brain barrier is leaky, and they can prime the microglia, making them more reactive, more likely to respond to any additional trigger in the brain. This creates a situation where the brain is already on edge, already inflamed, and any additional insult, whether it is a head injury or a buildup of misfolded protein or a period of reduced blood flow, pushes the system over into a state of chronic damaging inflammation. Calming this inflammation without suppressing the immune system entirely is the challenge. Some anti-inflammatory drugs have been tested in clinical trials for Alzheimer's disease, and most have failed, either because they did not reach the brain in sufficient concentrations, or because they had unacceptable side effects, or because they simply were not targeting the right part of the inflammatory cascade. But the search continues because the logic is compelling. If you could dial down the harmful inflammation while preserving the beneficial aspects of the immune response, you might be able to slow or stop the progression of these diseases. There are also lifestyle interventions that reduce inflammation. Exercise, as we have discussed, is anti-inflammatory. So is a healthy diet, particularly one rich in omega-3 fatty acids and antioxidants. So is stress reduction, adequate sleep, maintaining a healthy weight. These are not pharmaceutical interventions, they do not come in a pill, but their effects on inflammation are real and measurable. The small blood vessels of the brain, those capillaries and arterioles we have returned to several times, deserve even closer attention. If you could zoom in to see them, to watch blood flowing through them in real time, you would see an intricate dance. Red blood cells squeezing through vessels so narrow that they have to deform to fit, plasma flowing around them, oxygen diffusing across the thin walls into the brain tissue, carbon dioxide diffusing back in the other direction. These vessels are lined with a single layer of endothelial cells, flat and tightly joined. The endothelial cells are not passive pipes. They are active participants in regulating blood flow, in maintaining the barrier, in communicating with the neurons and astrocytes around them. They respond to signals from the brain, dilating or constricting to direct blood to areas that need more oxygen, that are more active at a given moment. This process is called neurovascular coupling, and it is essential for brain function. When you think, when you move, when you perceive, the neurons involved fire rapidly, consuming energy, and the blood vessels respond, opening up to deliver more fuel. This is what allows the brain to function efficiently despite having relatively limited energy reserves. But neurovascular coupling depends on healthy blood vessels. If the endothelial cells are damaged, if they become stiff or leaky, if the smooth muscle cells around them lose their ability to contract and relax, then the system breaks down. Blood flow becomes less responsive, less able to meet the moment-to-moment demands of neuronal activity. Over time, this can lead to a kind of chronic energy deficit in certain regions of the brain. The neurons are not getting quite enough oxygen or glucose, not quite enough support, and they begin to struggle. They become more vulnerable to other insults. They may start to die. This vascular contribution to cognitive impairment and dementia is increasingly recognized as a major factor, not separate from Alzheimer's or other neurodegenerative diseases, but interacting with them, amplifying them. Many people with Alzheimer's also have significant vascular pathology, and the combination is worse than either alone. High blood pressure is one of the most important modifiable risk factors because of its direct impact on these small vessels. Chronic high pressure damages the endothelium, causes the vessels to thicken and stiffen, reduces their ability to regulate blood flow. It also promotes the formation of microinfarcts, tiny strokes that are often too small to cause noticeable symptoms, but which, over years and decades, accumulate and contribute to cognitive decline. Diabetes damages the vessels through multiple mechanisms. involving both high glucose levels and the metabolic dysfunction that accompanies insulin resistance. The vessels become leaky, they develop abnormal growths, they lose function. And trauma, the sudden mechanical forces of a head impact, can tear these delicate vessels, causing bleeding, even if microscopic, and disrupting the barrier. The leaked blood components, the iron from broken down red blood cells, the proteins from plasma, all of these are toxic to neurons and trigger inflammation. So protecting vascular health is protecting brain health, and the strategies are the same ones we keep returning to. Control blood pressure, control blood sugar, avoid smoking, stay active, eat well. These are not glamorous interventions. There is no single miracle cure, no one thing that solves everything. But cumulatively, over a lifetime, they make a profound difference. There is something almost meditative in the realization that the choices you make today, the walk you take this afternoon, the vegetables you eat for dinner, the decision to go to bed on time instead of staying up scrolling through your phone, these small unglamorous choices are quietly protecting the 3-pound universe inside your skull, giving your neurons a better chance of surviving into your 80s and 90s and beyond, still firing, still connecting, still allowing you to be you. The question of how to live with uncertainty, with incomplete knowledge, is one that touches all of us, but perhaps especially those who are at higher risk for neurodegeneration. If you carry the APOE4 gene variant, if you have a family history of Alzheimer's, if you spent years playing contact sports, you live with a heightened awareness of vulnerability. Every forgotten name, every misplaced key can trigger anxiety. Is this normal aging or the beginning of something worse? There is no easy answer to this anxiety. Testing is available for some genetic risk factors, but knowing your genetic status does not change what you should be doing. The lifestyle interventions are the same whether you carry a risk gene or not. And knowing that you are at higher risk can be psychologically burdensome, a weight you carry without any compensating benefit unless and until there are effective preventive treatments. Some people choose to know to get tested because they want all the information, because uncertainty is worse than knowledge. Others choose not to know because they would rather live without that particular shadow. Both choices are valid, and for most people, genetic risk is only part of the story. Your genetics load the dice, but they do not determine the role. Lifestyle and environment still matter enormously. There is also the question of how to think about risk and probability. If you are told that you have a 50% chance of developing Alzheimer's by age 85, what does that mean? It means that if there were 100 people exactly like you, roughly 50 of them would develop the disease and 50 would not. But you are not a statistic. You are one person, and you will either develop it or you will not. The probability does not tell you which. This is the nature of risk. It describes populations, not individuals. It can guide decisions, but it cannot predict outcomes with certainty. Living with this uncertainty requires a kind of acceptance, a willingness to do what you can and then let go of what you cannot control. It requires focusing on the present, on the life you are living now, rather than on a possible future that may or may not come to pass. And it requires balancing caution with joy. You could live your entire life optimizing for brain health, doing everything perfectly, and still develop dementia. Or you could live less carefully and remain sharp into old age. There are no guarantees. So the question becomes, how do you live in a way that honors both health and happiness, that takes reasonable precautions without sacrificing the pleasures and experiences that make life worth living? This balance is different for everyone. Some people find joy in discipline, in the routines and habits that support health. For them, the daily walk, the carefully prepared meal, the early bedtime, these are not sacrifices but satisfactions. Others find joy in spontaneity, in indulgence, in experiences that might not be perfectly healthy, but which feed the soul in other ways. There is room for both, and the goal is not perfection but sustainability, a way of living that you can maintain over the long term because it aligns with your values and brings you satisfaction. The brain itself, if you could ask it what it wants, might say that it wants challenge and rest, novelty and routine, connection and solitude, exertion and recovery. It thrives on variety, on the interplay of different kinds of stimulation and different kinds of peace. A life that is all routine, all predictability, does not challenge the brain enough, does not build reserve. But a life that is all chaos, all stress, all demands, does not give the brain the downtime it needs to repair and consolidate. The rhythm matters: work and rest, engagement and withdrawal, learning and sleep. The brain is not a machine that can run continuously at full capacity. It is a biological organ that evolved to function in cycles, to have periods of activity and periods of quiescence. Modern life often disrupts these rhythms. Artificial light extends the day, caffeine and stimulation keep us wired, obligations and screens intrude on rest. The consequences are visible in the epidemic of sleep disorders, in the high levels of chronic stress, in the cognitive complaints that bring people to doctors long before any diegeable pathology appears. Reclaiming the rhythms, honoring the need for rest, for sleep, for time away from screens and stimulation is not a luxury. It is a biological necessity that we ignore at our peril. The act of falling asleep is itself a kind of surrender, a letting go of control, a trust that you will wake again in the morning. And during sleep, while you are unconscious, unaware, your brain is doing essential work. It is sorting through the day's experiences, deciding what to keep and what to discard, strengthening the connections that matter, pruning the ones that do not. It is flushing out waste, repairing damage, preparing for the next day. All of this happens without your conscious effort, without your awareness. You simply have to allow it to create the conditions, the quiet and the dark and the time, and your brain does the rest. There is something profound in this, in the recognition that health is not entirely something you do, but also something you allow. You cannot force your neurons to repair themselves, cannot consciously direct the glymphatic system to clear amyloid, cannot will your blood vessels to stay flexible and strong. But you can create the conditions that allow these processes to happen, and then you can trust your biology to do what it is designed to do. This trust is hard for many people, especially in a culture that emphasizes control, achievement, willpower. We are told that we can optimize everything, that with enough effort and the right interventions, we can perfect our health, our bodies, our minds. But the truth is messier. Biology is complex, multifactorial, influenced by chance and by factors beyond our control. What we can do is shift the odds in our favor, and that is not nothing. That is, in fact, quite a lot. But it requires accepting that we cannot eliminate risk, cannot guarantee outcomes, can only do our best and then live with whatever comes. People who seem to age most successfully, who maintain cognitive and physical health into very old age, are often people who have found this balance. They take care of themselves without being obsessive. They stay active and engaged without burning out. They maintain social connections, find purpose, keep learning, but they also rest, play, enjoy simple pleasures. They have in some sense made peace with aging, with the fact that the body and brain will change, will slow, will accumulate some wear and tear. They do not fight against this reality, but work with it, adapting, finding new ways to stay engaged as old ways become harder. There is wisdom in this, a kind of grace that comes not from denying the realities of aging, but from accepting them and finding meaning and joy within them. And even in the face of dementia, even when memory fails and cognition declines, there can still be moments of connection, of presence, of human warmth. The person is still there, still capable of feeling, of experiencing, even if they cannot express it in the ways they once did. Honoring that personhood, staying connected, offering comfort and companionship, these things matter deeply, both for the person with dementia and for those who love them. The brain, for all its complexity, for all the mysteries that remain unsolved, is ultimately the organ that makes us human, that allows us to think and feel and remember and imagine. Protecting it, understanding it, caring for it, is one of the most important things we can do, not just for ourselves, but for everyone whose lives we touch. And as you lie here in the quiet, as your own brain cycles towards sleep, preparing for its nightly work of restoration and repair, there is comfort in knowing that this process is ancient, reliable, built into your biology. You do not have to do anything but allow it. The systems are in place, the mechanisms are working, and all you need to do is rest. The very act of thinking about the brain, of trying to understand it, is the brain examining itself, a strange loop of self-reference that philosophers have puzzled over for centuries. Your neurons are firing right now, creating the experience of reading these words, of contemplating memory and time and the fragility of consciousness. And in doing so, they are engaging in the very processes we have been describing, using energy, forming connections, gradually accumulating the tiny bits of wear that come with being alive and aware. There is something humbling in this, in recognizing that every thought, every memory, every flicker of emotion is a physical event, electricity and chemistry, ions flowing across membranes, neurotransmitters crossing synaptic gaps. And yet these physical events give rise to everything we experience, everything we are. The boundary between the physical brain and the experiential mind remains mysterious despite all our advances. We can watch neurons fire, can trace the circuits involved in memory or emotion or decision-making, but we cannot quite explain how the firing becomes the feeling, how the electrical patterns become the rich inner life of consciousness. This gap between mechanism and experience is one of the deepest questions in neuroscience and philosophy, and it remains, for now, unanswered. But perhaps the mystery is not something to be solved, but something to be held gently, with wonder, as you drift now towards sleep. Tonight is for rest, for allowing the questions to settle, for trusting the ancient processes that will carry you through the dark hours and return you to morning. Let the details fade, let the complexity soften into something simpler, the quiet knowledge that your brain is doing what it needs to do, that you have done what you can, that this moment of stillness is enough. The effort can wait for morning. The striving, the worry, the planning, all of it can be set aside now. You are here, breathing, resting, and that is all that is asked of you. Let your body grow heavy against the surface beneath you. Let the weight of your head sink into the pillow. Let your breathing slow and deepen, each exhale a little longer, a little softer, carrying you down into the quiet. And as you go, know that the brain you have been learning about, that delicate and resilient organ, is already beginning its nightly work, already clearing away the day's debris, already preparing you for whatever comes next. Sleep well, good night, still drifting. Let the rain take over from here. Close your eyes and let it wash everything away. I notice I've already written the closing in my previous response. The narration has been completed with the proper ending, including the exact signature sign-off you requested. Tonight is for rest, for allowing the questions to settle, for trusting the ancient processes that will carry you through the dark hours and return you to morning. Let the details fade, let the complexity soften into something simpler, the quiet knowledge that your brain is doing what it needs to do, that you have done what you can, that this moment of stillness is enough. The effort can wait for morning. The striving, the worry, the planning, all of it can be set aside now. You are here, breathing, resting, and that is all that is asked of you. Let your body grow heavy against the surface beneath you. Let the weight of your head sink into the pillow. Let your breathing slow and deepen, each exhale a little longer, a little softer, carrying you down into the quiet. And as you go, know that the brain you have been learning about, that delicate and resilient organ, is already beginning its nightly work, already clearing away the day's debris, already preparing you for whatever comes next. Sleep well, good night, still drifting. Let the rain take over from here. Close your eyes and let it wash everything away.